Leprous with their brand new album, Malena. And this is a band that has had a very exciting past 2 years, ever since the release of The Congregation. It's a band that's gained a lot of fans, not only from that album, but from those same people exploring their past releases. And for those who are unaware of who this is, they actually have a little bit of background behind them, aside from just coming together and having formed a band. Leprous was the backing band for Esond on some of his tours, so if you are familiar with that name, you are actually familiar a little bit, kind of vis-a-vis, with Leprous, but they have released their own material, and it's been fantastic. The Congregation brought a lot of folks in, it brought a lot of press in, which means that the name got out there, which now means in 2017 that this album, Malina, feels like a big deal. It feels like an important time in the Progaverse, and now there's expectations, so did they deliver? The first thing I want to mention is that I feel that Leprous decided to take what they did with The Congregation and sort of flip it on its heels a little bit. That was a very dark and moody album that was very melancholic, that had a sort of sinister glow to it, as opposed to 100% trying to aim to sort of be flowery or, aim to be ridiculous. This is an album, however, in Malina that I think channels different sides of not only Leprous' sound, but also channels different sides of progressive music in general. It actually has a little bit more of a progressive rock glow to it, whereas The Congregation just naturally felt like a metal album, even if it musically didn't always have that makeup, which is an interesting concept to say the least, because it's almost like going into music philosophy as opposed to, just calling it what it is. But it's true. Whenever something has that sort of darker nature, as The Congregation did, you're almost implicitly always going to be tempted to call it metal, one way or the other, regardless of what it truly is. So, with Bonneville and with Stuck, the very first two tracks on this album, you start to understand that progressive rock sort of mentality. Now, it does have some rises and falls that certainly feels like it's trying to escalate toward metal, but by and large, this is an album that starts off very soft. It sort of keeps itself very low-key, very low-played, and does not really aim to escalate too far unless it feels the need. And I think that level of care, that level of sort of maturity is a very strong thing that Leprous has going for them on this record. They are not a band that is going to necessarily sell themselves to needing to have a certain sound or a certain idea just to please people. Instead, they're aiming to tell their story the way in which they want to tell their story. And at times, names that come to mind whenever I listen to this are Pain of Salvation, which is a really nice reference point. Now, while vocally it is a much different story than listening to Daniel from POS, but it is still sort of, whenever you come to the music and the vocals cascading around one another and sort of building something out of a sometimes very skinny framework, as opposed to within a lot of prog rock, which needs sort of like a lavish framework, the comparison actually makes a lot of sense. Leprous right now sort of almost use the Hawken effect in the fact in which they are able to craft something that feels very 80s and really make it feel modern in 2017. And it can be shown with songs that you hear on this album, such as Mirage. Mirage is a great example of this, considering it's able to sort of just linger its way through itself, but at the same time seem very embrazened and emboldened with power. Now, what this album doesn't do, which I feel may be its biggest weakness, is that this is not something that grabs you instantaneously and sort of pulls you in like The Congregation did. This is not a whirlpool effect album. This is instead one that almost requires a little bit more of careful study to understand some of its inherent balances and why its ebb and flow seem to feel a little bit jittered and off-center. And it's just not because they're a prog band, it's really the composition itself. I feel like some of these tracks overuse some of those softer moments where perhaps a little bit of escalation would have given them a little bit more life and livelihood. But I also feel at the same time that this album is certainly a grower, but not a grower to the sense of The Congregation, or not The Congregation, but The Astonishing by Dream Theater, where whenever it does grow on you, you start to notice a lot more of its flaws, and you are no longer blinded by the, Dream Theater effect of it being them. But instead, this is one where the subtle genius behind what Leprous tries to accomplish here and there on Malina starts to really expose itself. When this album gets heavy, it's certainly one that feels a lot like, genuinely what they've done in the past. They tried something a little bit different that's sort of been not so much a cornerstone of their sound, but rather it's been sort of the corner of a wall that has been over there. Then you've been over to that corner, you've seen the corner, you know it exists, but now that corner is getting its time to shine. This is an album that's a bit of an enigma that's wrapped up in a question mark. I don't know if this is one that, as time goes on, is going to be seen as a massive success, a great follow-up for the congregation, or if it's going to feel like the weak sort of baby brother of the congregation. And as of right now, it's sort of taking on that role of weak baby brother, as I still would recommend this, but it's a 19 out of 30. But I want to know what you think about this album. What did you think about Malena by Leprous? Let me know in the comments below. My name is CoverKillerNation, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.